let's get to our good friend. He's been so patient. He was practicing today with his church choir in Cairo, Egypt. We got him off of choir practice to come and talk to us about some issues. Our good friend, Eddie Yeranian, veteran correspondent, the Voice of America, veteran announcer, CBS News, and 10 years running. It's hard to imagine. Our man in the Middle East on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Eddie Yeranian, live in Cairo. Eddie, great to have you, man. Sorry I had to get you out of church.
Thank you, John. As always.
Ed, can you believe we've been together 10 years? Is that hard to believe?
It's amazing how time goes by when you're having fun.
Good answer. Oh, God. Okay. Tell us, what is the story in Beirut? What was this explosion? Give us the whole scoop.
Yeah, well, there's been a great deal of friction between Israel and Hezbollah and the other Iranian allies. And I believe Prime Minister Netanyahu has decided to be very tough with both Iran and Hezbollah and its allies, their allies. And the speculation, of course, since we have no proof, is that, at least from the Arab side of the coin, the Arab analysts, that Israel is behind this explosion in Beirut. And the Defense Minister, Benny Gantz, pretty much laid down the gauntlet a couple of days ago, saying if Lebanon wants a conflict, we can give you a big conflict. So I take that as an omen. But, of course, omens are not proof. But yesterday and the day before, Israel launched 2 air raids, one over the border area near Iraq, Syria and Iraq, where there's a major pro-Iranian base that's near the border at Abu Kamel, and also along the Golan Heights. Syria and its allies were tried to launch a raid the day before, and 4 of their militia fighters were killed. So there was a sort of a precedent of action and things happening, not to mention all the explosions in Iran, which that have been taking place, low-level explosions for the most part, but not getting a lot of coverage in Western media. And the Arab press has been saying that Israel, they think Israel is behind these attacks on Iran. So a lot of
what do you
action.
think?
And
what do you think, Edward? I mean, we've heard that Netanyahu might have been behind them. But what do you think? And if he is, what's his objective?
I guess the speculation is Hezbollah has been trying to attack Israel, allegedly for one of its men that was killed during an Israeli raid, one of its commanders, and that the speculation is that this is just Israel trying to forestall a reaction along its border. There has been suspicion that Hezbollah was trying to launch an attack along the border, several attacks, and that this is just the way of giving them a message, you better not try it.
Now, what about they were saying the explosives have been there for a long time? How would they get unearthed? How would they find those? Like, how did those become available? If Israel's behind it, apparently what they're saying now is the explosives were there, somehow there.
Yeah. Well, a lot of this stuff is there because the port was a major artery for Lebanon during the war, after the war, and any ships coming in, transiting, would be leaving things there. And you can imagine if somebody wanted to make mischief, that they would have left something there that they could use at any time over a long period of time. The rockets themselves, Hezbollah has been stockpiling rockets for, 20 years, 25 years, probably going back to before the end of the war, before Israel pulled out, I guess, in 2000 from southern Lebanon. So there are rockets all over Lebanon. It's a virtual rocket depot all over the country, ready to explode. I'm not sure that Hezbollah is going to pick a fight, but certainly it's not a good sign that they have all these rockets all over the country.
Let's get back to Netanyahu. I mean, if Israel did this, I mean, eventually this is going to get traced back to them. What are the consequences? What are the ramifications?
Well, I saw a cartoon in an Arab newspaper showing, I guess it was a Tom and Jerry cartoon, where the dog is on a leash and constantly getting bashed by the cat with its fist. And the commentary was that the dog really can't react, meaning that Israel has been bashing Iran for the last, I don't know how many months, blowing things up, blowing up their militia stockpiles of rockets in Iraq. They're the ones, we think, who blew up all these Iraqi pro-Iranian militia stockpiles of rockets, at least 5 or 6 of them, which of course never gets a lot of coverage in the American media. Also, all these attacks from recent days in Iran, the Natanz nuclear enrichment facility, which is a major facility that was disabled. Petroleum facilities, buildings inside of Tehran, fires taking place at almost daily intervals. I mean, almost every day you see a fire breaking out somewhere in Iran, an explosion, mysterious explosion, and the commentators are suggesting that this is Israel. Of course, we can't prove that, but there's a long pattern of these things, and their planes have been very active over both Iraq and Syria over the last 12 to 18 months. So a lot of aggressive behavior, activity against Iran. I mean, of course, Iran is the one that's being aggressive with its expansion plans, but Israel has apparently decided to throw down the gauntlet and go after Iran.
Where do we go from here? I mean, as far as Lebanon is concerned in this explosion, how do you see their government reacting? Is there going to be any payback?
I find it difficult to imagine that they're not going to try to give some payback, but of course that would escalate things and make the situation worse. A lot of friends in Lebanon I've spoken with have told me they think things are going to get worse, so they're suspecting that there's going to be some payback and that the Israelis no doubt will react to that reaction. So I don't think that the future looks very bright here, and this was a very, very bad explosion. I mean, I was in Beirut for 20 years, and I lived through the one against Hariri, and from what I'm hearing from friends, this was multiple times worse. If you just look at the video on social media, it looks like a mushroom cloud. One of the depots, you can see rocket after rocket after rocket exploding, and then something really major, much worse than just these little rockets that started off exploding. There was something really bad in there. And of course, everyone says that Hezbollah has some things that they don't admit to having, that, of course, no doubt the Israelis traced to the port in Beirut. And
so that's why they blew it up.
Yes, I think knowing what was there, they would maybe have had to react.
Eddie Yeranian with us live in Cairo, our man in the Middle East, veteran reporter, Voice of America, CBS News. What position does this put the Trump administration and the United States in?
Well, John, I didn't think this out before we talked, but putting things together, I guess it could be potentially dangerous for the president leading into the election, because this could ultimately set off a major conflagration in the Middle East, and that could have negative consequences on the U.S. and ultimately on the election. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but it could, of course. With Israel being aggressive with Iran, and never mind this explosion, but with all the explosions inside in Iran and against the Shiite militias in Syria and Iraq, the thinking is that it could set off a conflagration, but I don't know that it will. I think the president has been playing it very coolly under fire, and he didn't let the Qasem Soleimani, Iran's commander in the Middle East, in Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, when the U.S. assassinated him, he didn't let that spiral out of control. So I don't have a sense that he's going to let this spiral out of control. But of course, there are a lot of forces that are playing against him all over the world and all over the Middle East. So you never know. People will be trying to use this against him, like they've been trying to use a lot of other things. So you never know.
Well, that's true, but you're right. He has had a very steady hand in the Middle East, much to the chagrin, I guess, of his detractors that just want to take Trump down in this election. But he's had a very steady hand. he's had a very stable policy there. I would view, win or lose, this has got to be one of the successes that he's had, that things have not escalated with his policies as president. And even his response to this bombing, to this explosion, the president has been unusually measured. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I think the pattern of his behavior over the past 3.5 years is of being cautious, prudent, wise, and he's not set off a conflagration in the Middle East, despite all the nasty things that people say about him in the media. If you look at Obama's 8-year tenure, he practically set the Middle East on fire. I mean, he set Syria on fire, he set Libya on fire, Bush before him set Iraq on fire. If you take those two presidents and all the places in the Middle East that burned while they were in office, I think President Trump has been very cautious, has very little blood on his hands, if any, and I think he's been a very wise player in terms of his foreign policy in the Middle East.
Eddie Yeranian, I'm out of time. I want to thank you for your effort today to give us this important update. I know you were in church singing in your choir in Cairo. Thank you, Ed. Thanks for doing it. Thank you so much. Great analysis.
My pleasure, John.
John Fredericks Radio Network.